And it was like a muzzle had been taken off my mouth. This weight I'd been carrying around me had been removed. I could speak clearly.
Welcome to episode number 7 of the Common Questions podcast series. My name is Jonathan Ciecka, and I'm joined here today by Mrs McKenna Heliker.
Mrs. Very important note.
Yes.
Mrs. McKenna Heliker.
Clarifying
Hi, Jonathan.
that. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Absolutely. I'm over the moon to be on.
I don't know if I would recommend going that high. I would temper your expectations just a little bit.
I've been listening through, and I've been enjoying them. So it's really cool to get to sit down and talk with you about some hard questions, but common questions.
Absolutely. So tell me about you growing up. What was a young McKenna like?
Well, I spent a lot of my time up in trees and reading books and drawing or painting on anything I could get my hands on. And I was really shy and quiet, except when I was chatting nonstop. But then I had a piano teacher tell me that I was a chatterbox in front of a room full of adults. And so that tempered that back a little bit. But yeah, I had my hands in a lot of things. Academically, kind of an overachiever. My mom really pushed us to achieve. So spent a lot of time reading, a lot of time doing things to edify us, mind, body, spirit, all of that. And spent a lot of time at church. Church was huge, VBS as kids, and all through, up until high school, I was at Bible studies with my mom and dad and stuff. So really grew up reading a lot of great books too, in high school especially, and getting to know the Lord better in that way. So God's always been a part of my life from the time I was a child, as much as all the other things.
Awesome. And when would you say that you came into a personal relationship with Jesus? What did that look like for you?
I think I was about 12 when I fully recognized my need for a savior, when that dawning came on me. Because I'd grown up in church, I knew who Jesus was. I think I was even baptized before that. But then when I hit 11 or 12, it came on me that I understand that I'm a sinner and I need to be saved. So I was redunked. I was baptized again. It's funny, baptisms for our church were actually held at my family's pool. So that wasn't, too far to go for that one. But then when I was 18, I had made some decisions that struck me. It hit me for the first time just how capable I was of evil. They weren't even that bad of a decisions. I got off on the wrong course, and I realized I had been living completely anxious and depressed and masking it and hiding it, and I didn't want to live anymore. And I could feel this weight of Satan telling me I deserved to die, and all I could do was throw myself on the mercy of Christ. And so that was when I started to really lean in and say, God, I don't want to do this anymore, and you're going to have to take over. And then trying to follow the Lord and stumbling brought me about 10 years later to a recovery program where I finally really stopped trying to live the life myself and surrender everything to Jesus. And he has been walking with me for the last 6 years in that. And I've always loved the Lord, and I think I've always known the Lord. But he finally helped me find my place and how to worship, and how he could show me that he loves me, and did so much healing and set me free with this passion for what we're actually going to talk about today, which is universal. But that's my story in short. There have been multiple coming to the Lord's for me and getting to know him better, and he's endless as far as the ability to get to know him. So pressing in more has always yielded positive results.
Awesome. And that sets me up very well to transition into what we're talking about today. We're talking about what a Christian view of addiction and ongoing sin is, kind of coming off the heel of the video, talking about what God's will is for our life. Then the counter question to that becomes, okay, what if we know that we're living outside of God's will and we're struggling to actually conform into that image? And if people get one thing out of this episode, what do you want that one thing to be?
First and foremost, that when you hear the word addiction, it's kind of triggers some big things. We like to put it in a box of maybe the big three: drugs, alcohol, pornography. Those are three big easy ones. But at its core, addiction is anything that is getting in the way of our walk with Christ, with continuous, what's the word I'm looking for?
With some regularity.
Yes, regularity. Anything that we go to as I can do this in my own strength. So it's easy to think of addiction, or I love that you put addiction and continuous sin together, because that's what it is. It's not just these big things that we put in that box. Everybody struggles with something, and addiction is sort of universal. And if we're thinking about it rightly, I think scripturally, we will start seeing it is about continuous sin. And because of that, no one should feel alone carrying the weight of that sin or afraid to confess that sin, because in confession, there's healing. So I would want people to take away from this that if you are struggling with something and you're keeping it a secret, even if it's something as simple as sadness or a hunger or a loneliness, that can be something that Jesus can heal, that can even kind of come under an addiction. It can be linked to that sin that we keep going back to. And there's freedom that we can find now in this world that Jesus promised us now. We don't have to wait to heaven to start experiencing that. It's a very positive, I think, takeaway, hopefully, for this. We'll get to that by the end of how I get from one to the other.
Absolutely. So you started to hit on there that it's not just the big visual sins that like that person is sticking a needle in their arm. They're clearly addicted. And we were talking in the meeting before this about how it's more of a sanctification issue than just a recovery issue. Unpack that for me a little bit. What do you mean?
So with things like the big heavy ones, when we think about addiction, the reason that our brains kind of automatically trigger that response of drugs, alcohol, porn, or gambling, something one of those big ones, is that they are visceral for people. They impact the people outside of you. When you struggle with something like alcohol, it's going to deeply impact your family. It's not something you can really hide. So a lot of us have an experience with someone or judgment about people who do struggle with those particular sins. We don't have those as much about the few I've mentioned, codependency, which is something that I struggle with, which is just wanting to make sure everyone is okay all the time. That leads me to trying to manipulate situations sometimes, or being in control of things I'm not in control of, or sins like pride, which is really a source sin. And Pastor Corey talks about this all the time with, if you're over here on this wall and it's sin, and Jesus is the other side of it. Jesus is the other wall. Our goal is to walk towards Jesus. Our goal is to stay on that path towards Jesus. And thinking of it as addiction is that turning back. We keep going back to that wall. We keep going back to sin. Well, a lot of the times, it's not as simple as I keep going back to that. I really want to go to Jesus, and I start going down that road. And I've asked him to break the chains that have kept me attached to this wall of sin. But for some people, they stumble and they fall, and they're falling back against that wall over and over again, not realizing, and this is what it was like for me, I was blind. So I'm trying to walk towards Jesus, but not seeing that I'm doing it in my own strength, that I had hurts. And this is something we talk about in the recovery program that I head up here at the church. Hurts and hangups, things that we think, things that we've experienced in life that are not keeping us chained to the wall, but have left us blind, have left us crippled. And we're like, I'm going to Jesus, I'm running to Jesus, and I keep stumbling and I keep falling over things, and I keep having to brace myself on that wall because I just can't keep walking. I can't go. I'm struggling with that. Struggles is a really good way to put it. So we're trying to get sanctified, but we're trying to do it in our own strength without realizing I don't just need to tell Jesus, I'm sorry for those things I did, and now I'm trying to walk with you. I can bring him my blindness. I can bring him the deep hurts. I can bring him the struggles. It's like I've been chained to the wall, but I'm actually still carrying all the chains with me because I have to take care of this. I have to bring this along with me. I don't want to put it down. I don't want to let God into that space in my life. I don't feel like I'm explaining this as well as I could be, but we're walking through life carrying around these things that cause us to go to coping mechanisms that are unhealthy and unhelpful. And we don't want to bring the source of that to Jesus because he should have already taken care of that. So it's shameful that I would have to look at it again. If you've got a bullet wound, you can't just keep slapping a Band-Aid over it. You have to say, hey, God, take the bullet out at some point. So that's the source of those hurts. And Paul even talks about this in Romans with, I know that nothing good lives in me. That is my sinful nature. I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Plenty of people with addictions want to turn their lives around. Why do we keep going back to that wall? Why can't I just head towards Jesus? Well, I am blind. I am lame. I am carrying around hurts from my past. I'm carrying around these hang-ups around the ways I think, even the way I think about God, things I think about myself. And I don't want to bring those. I just want to bring the present forward. I feel like I'm babbling. Stop me, Jonathan.
You're good. You're good. It's a great time. So having talked a little bit about when we ask for those chains to be taken off, but it feels like they're still there. And I'm using that feels like language very specifically because that freedom is there. The question is, do you live in it or not? If someone says, look, I'm trying to live in that freedom, I'm trying to leave those chains behind, but for some reason it feels like I just can't. What would you say to that person other than attending our recovery program on Thursdays at 7 p.m.?
Well, the reason that I do usually say, come to our recovery program is because I found freedom there. How did I find freedom there? It's a 12-step program. Great. What's a 12-step program? It starts from a place of, I can't do this anymore. I have to go to someone else and say, I can't do this anymore. And that person in the 12 steps and in Christ-centered 12 steps says, hey, your higher power is Jesus Christ. It's basic discipleship, but to do it in a space that is safe is necessary when we're dealing with really hard things. So I would say to that person, I was you. I understand. I didn't go to alcohol. I didn't go to drugs. I went to control. I struggled with rage. I struggled with horrible anxiety and depression. I struggled with suicidal ideation and wanting to just end my life because I couldn't do it by myself. And that felt shameful to me because I know the God of the universe loves me. I know he has something good for me. The whole time, from 15 to the time I came into recovery, around 27, 28, I was serving in churches and hearing the truth and believing the truth and trying to practice the fruits of the Spirit. The fruits of the Spirit were not manifesting in my life. Manifesting is a terrible word, to be clear. It's a very overused word in our society. But I was trying to make them happen. And the space between me falling down and falling back against that sin wall got longer and longer, but it felt like it reset me back because clearly I'm doing something wrong. What helps is confession. And not just, I was a sinner. I'm confessing that I was a sinner and that my life was terrible. I went into these groups with women who sat there and listened and didn't judge and didn't tell me how to fix it. They just pointed me to Jesus. And I talked about horrible hurts in my life. I listened and heard them sharing things about their hurts, their pains, traumas that they'd been through, very basic things that they'd been through. And hurt is universal. I could understand what people who struggled with drugs and alcohol were talking about. It reshaped my own perspective because I came in so judgmental. I actually went to Celebrate Recovery when I started to serve. I went in to be on worship, and I tell them all the time, all my CR peeps know, I'm like, I went in going, I'm going to help those people. Turns out I am one of those people, because everybody is one of those people. Broken. We all have a past. So to confess that is necessary. Deep, intentional confession. And another way maybe to think about it, because I love metaphors, is if we invite the Holy Spirit into our lives, it's kind of like we ask him in and we sit him down on the couch and we say, this is a space I've made for you. You know, we've invited Jesus into our lives. Here's the spot I have for you on this couch. And he gets up and starts to walk around our house, metaphorically. And we start closing doors in his face and saying, not that one, it's too dirty. Not that one, it's too painful. Like, Jesus, I want you to transform my life, but I'm not ready for you to look at that yet. It didn't really happen. You're here now, so I don't have to look in that closet. I don't have to look in that space. But if we want to be clean, we have to take those painful things out and give them to Jesus. And as I started doing that, it's scary, because it means, Lord, I'm going to bring you the fact that I'm really angry with someone, and he's going to show me a bunch of things I didn't realize were attached to that. And then I have to do something about that. I have to go make it right. It's an active process of surrender that goes with it. But it reduces the amount of shame around and stigma around addiction, and it increases our capacity to be compassionate for people, and it sets people free to live the life that Christ has for them, because you're not carrying around those chains anymore. Because sometimes it feels like we're carrying them around because we picked them up and we're carrying them around. We haven't actually laid them down at Jesus' feet, and we don't even realize we're still carrying them, because the church says you come to Jesus, you experience freedom. And I love that experience here. Corey and all of you are doing all of that work to get into those life groups, be in a discipleship relationship. That is the exact same thing. But you have to be ready and willing to really get into the dark stuff and the deep stuff with someone, and find someone you can trust. That's really hard sometimes if you aren't in a regulated space, is really all a recovery program is. It's just a regulated space.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you talked a lot about a very thoroughgoing confession there. I think especially in a structured 12-step program like that, the inventory is both the most helpful and the most painful part of that process. Tell everyone why they should be willing to lay everything that's ever happened to them out on a piece of paper and tell it to someone else.
I'll tell you from my experience. When I started in a recovery program, which was intensive discipleship, really, truly, if you're doing it right, I did my inventory begrudgingly. It is scary. We say take a searching and fearless moral inventory. I don't like the word fearless. I always say courageous, because it's going to be scary, but you have to do it. And I journaled out and wrote out all of these things. And I sat down opposite someone who I'd known maybe 6 months. And I got to experience first the love of Jesus, because she just listened. And she also helped me through the process realize there were things that I was taking responsibility for that were not mine to take responsibility for. So put that where it belongs, not mine to carry. And to take up and bring to Jesus things that I did need to own responsibility for. It cleared so much in my mind, and it made space for healing. And I walked out of that process. It was a long, heavy process. And there were some women in a group I was at that night, and I came out and they said, "You're different. What happened?" And it was like a muzzle had been taken off my mouth. This weight I'd been carrying around me had been removed. I could speak clearly. Before this had happened, a few years before, I'd had a nervous breakdown, and I had a stutter. I lost the ability to speak. For someone that did theater, that's scary. For someone that did worship, that's really scary. I was a shell of a person. And now I get to walk in front of people and show them that with vulnerability and confession and surrender and doing that with other people, there is so much freedom. Anonymity and confidentiality are a basic and necessary part of this process because we're talking about really scary, hard stuff. But I surrender that so willingly because every day is about walking through life saying, look at what Jesus did. Look at who I was and look at where he's brought me and look at all the people that he's changing around me because he gets to work through me. And I've done an inventory every year now since that. It's kind of expanding the inventory and it's not always fun because there's always something else underneath it. Started from a place of trauma and abandonment issues were not really on my radar. But I'm realizing I look at God in a really unhealthy way sometimes because of abandonment issues I have from my childhood. People are like, recovery is just navel gazing. It's just staying in that pain. But it's not, because we are looking and considering taking captive those thoughts and bringing them to Christ and saying, what do you want me to do with this? It's very different and it's very active. It's an active surrender. It's an active exchanging my will and my strength for Christ's strength. And there's so much sanctification. There's so much freedom there. And you want to come find some people who worship with all their hearts. Come to a recovery meeting because these are people who've been set free. I mean, Corey comes from knowing what it's like to be in those chains and fully seeing what it is to be set free. We admire those people that have been through that. Everybody's capable of seeing that when we bring every single thought, every hurt, every hang up, every bad habit to Christ and say, what's underneath this? Help me to see what you want me to exchange it for and let him do the work. Does that answer that question?
I think so.
Okay.
We're going to call it good.
Okay.
So let's say that theoretically someone is listening to this and they're not in this area. They get on the CR website and they can't find a meeting near them, but they've got some stuff that they want to work through. What would you say are some good principles for finding someone in their local church community that, hey, these are some signs that this would be a safe person to talk to these things about? How would they go about finding someone to confess to?
It's very similar to what we talk about in authentic discipleship. You should take authentic discipleship if you haven't. Finding someone who is further along the road than you, finding someone who's trustworthy. Sometimes you can only do that by spending time with them and really letting them into that space. That can create hurt, but still pressing in and trying to look for those relationships. I think the most important one, though, and this is something we tell people looking for what we would call them as sponsors, but it's disciple makers, is look for someone who has what you want and ask them how they got it. Because you're inviting that ability to say, show me what I'm not seeing. Because we all need someone, especially if we're walking around blind. And when we've invited Jesus into our hearts, we're not blind. We have the Spirit. But sometimes we've not addressed things in our body that are keeping us shackled to that wall. So they should be able to say, you're making this choice a lot. How is that working out for you? Someone that's willing to let you make mistakes and not judge you for them, that's a great person because they're never going to be able to make the choice for you. Someone who lets you be and loves you like Jesus does, but also encourages you to be better. That there's people like that everywhere. They're all over the place. You don't need to go to a recovery program to find them. It's just a little easier there, especially at CR, because we have guidelines and rules, and we have to follow those guidelines and rules in order to maintain our standing as a recovery program. So, yeah, and you can get workbooks, and you can find all kinds of other workbooks to work through. There's other recovery programs out there. There's places like your church that have discipleship programs. Just start trying to walk in that direction and be honest with yourself, and God will bring you where you need to be. My husband co-leads with me, James, and he is always an advocate of saying, not everybody needs this. But for him, for me, we definitely did. We didn't really grow up in a space where we had the path clearly lit. We learned a lot about how we had to do it in our own strength. And that's been a big hang up in our walk with Christ, because we can't do it in our own strength. So walking away from any addiction, you should have people around you to support you. But the main thing is being honest with yourself that it's not working and starting to try to walk in a different direction. And God will do the rest if you're asking God to help you do the rest. All he wants is willingness, really, truly. I say that as someone who has been loved by God so much. The more I fall down on my face and go, I can't do this anymore, he just puts all the pieces in place. He's always there to go, finally, you got it into your head. I don't want you to do it by yourself. I'd like to walk with you. Would you just let me have a hand in this? And I can see it as this gracious, beautiful relationship now and rejoice in it and be grateful for my weaknesses because through me, God is able to show other people that their weaknesses are not stopping them from having a relationship with Christ. He's loved me so much, and I get to go tell other people, Jesus loves you so much. He can love me. He can definitely love you. It's just a willingness issue. We have to be willing to let God do the driving, maybe. I actually don't like that analogy because we have our own bodies and we have to make the decisions ourselves. But Jesus has to be in the pilot seat. Jesus has to be in the navigator seat. He has to be the one telling us which direction to go all the time, every decision.
So you're telling me the intro music for this episode needs to be Jesus Take the Wheel?
Oh,
right?
Gosh. I sing that when I teach one lesson as a joke, genuinely, because I say this all the time. When I was growing up, I was taught that my emotions belong locked in the trunk of my metaphorical car. Mm-hmm. And when I got married, my husband gave me the space to invite them into the driver's seat. Now, finding the Lord was kicking the devil out of the car and asking Jesus, and I say, Jesus, take the wheel. No, Jesus isn't going to take the wheel. He's not going to come down and incarnate in your body. You have to start walking in the right direction. You have to go to church. You have to be a part of a community. You can't do this by yourself. You need to be looking for the resources. You need to be getting on your knees and praying. You have to do the work physically because you lived the life physically, and we carry these things in our bodies. You did a whole episode on the incarnation. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch the one on the incarnation. We are spirits with bodies. So we need to be aware that there are things written into our bodies that we have to surrender to Christ, but he's not going to come take the wheel, as it were. He just needs to be the one telling us exactly where to go, which means getting up and asking him first thing in the morning, where do you want me to go? And every step of every mile we take, every step of every moment we take, saying, Jesus, where do you want me to go? And that takes practice. So being around other people who are practicing it is really good too.
Absolutely. I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up. McKenna, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, truly.